As Beryl Robbins flew from Chicago O'Hare to Dulles International Airport near Washington, D.C., en route to Grand Cayman, I was overcome with anxiety. My wife Daphne sat next to me in first class. She was the main reason for my anxiety. I'm not the most observant guy in the world, so it took me almost 10 years to realize that she was a manipulative, self-centered bitch of the first order. My only excuse was that she was also adorable and hot, clearly no less than a 9.8 on a scale of 10, at least for my tastes. She is the only woman of this level of ardor who has ever shown romantic interest in me, at least given my poor powers of observation. I have always been a very motivated person. My high degree of motivation, at least according to my friends, and those family members who were not dysfunctional, causes me to keep blinders on in social situations. However, it contributes to the financial success I have achieved and the physical fitness I have also achieved. Another justification for my tolerance of pain and inattention is my past. Despite my high degree of motivation, I had a very bad attitude as a teenager. Despite having good grades in school, I got into many fights and altercations and even committed a few petty crimes. I started changing when I was 17 years old and one of the high school football coaches. Bill Dotson caught me doing something that was borderline a misdemeanor and a felony and gave me a way out go on the football team. Not only was Dotson not someone to mess with, but he was about the only grown man who ever gave a damn about me. I turned my violent tendencies into success on the football field as a defensive back and, under Dotson's tutelage, brought my previously violent temper under control. In college, I also played defensive back at a Division Roman II school, and my female counselor helped me take courses and get counseling to further control my character. By the time I graduated, I was pretty much a calm guy, although deep down I always wondered if I would fall off the wagon if provoked, and I still wore those blinders in social situations. Anyway, as I sat back on the plane, a movie of Daphne discrediting my confidence and my worth as a sexual being flashed through my head at great speed. In the color film, I had in my head her snide remarks about my choice of clothes, hairstyle, and taste in general. There have also been unfavorable comparisons in the media between me and some of my male friends. There were eye rolls when I wanted to be romantic or was looking for sex. There were less than subtle hints that she would rather be doing something else than interacting with me, although she certainly enjoyed the material benefits that my high level of business motivation provided. I think I ignored these slights and humiliations until I couldn't anymore. Receiving a verbal message about cheating from my close business partner was so embarrassing that I couldn't handle it. Just to make sure there was no doubt about Daphne's wrongdoing, I had a private investigator do some more investigating after my business partner's report, and the detective felt her case was easy to corroborate. The only reason I didn't leave the bitch right away was because of my lack of confidence in my ability to ever find another suitable partner. I have not yet come to the conclusion that I am worthy of love and have the right not to be deceived. The trip to Grand Cayman had been planned months before I learned of Daphne's infidelity, to get us away from the brutal Chicago winter. The day we left, the temperature was 10 degrees Fahrenheit, 6 inches of snow, overcast skies, and 25 miles per hour winds in Chicago, while in Grand Cayman it was 81 degree F, 5 miles per hour winds, and bright sunshine. There was no way I was going to miss this weather for a week or so. I put off solving my problem as long as I could. Daphne organized the trip, and I could never understand why we went through Dulles. In her usual hostile manner, she told me the reason only after we got to Dulles. There's a great little craft store just a 10-minute taxi ride from there, so I visit that during our 3-hour layover, she smiled as we climbed into the truck. You mean we have to get our luggage and then go through security again? I started crying. It's okay, Carol says I really need to check out this store, Daphne growled. Carol is one of her best friends, and she's also hot, but just as much of a bitch as Daphne. I refused to go to the store with her, and instead stayed with our luggage near the check-in counter, taking both of our rolling bags with me when I needed to move around, use the men's room, or buy something to eat or drink. My perception of the situation changed about 5 minutes before Daphne returned from her stay. Nora O'Donnell and her husband Jeff Tracy arrived at the airport and walked up to the same airline counter where I was waiting. How do I know the name of Nora O'Donnell's husband? I have a thing for her and have absorbed most of the public information about her and her family. I think most guys, if they admit it, have a crush on a celebrity or two. I have two and only two, Nora O'Donnell and Catherine McPhee. They are actually not that similar, although they are the same height. They both have beautiful faces and a pleasant demeanor in society, what I thought Daphne had when I married her. In fact, Daphne still does this. The problem is her personal behavior. My eyes were probably bulging out of my head. I even put on sunglasses to hide them as I tried to sneak glances at Nora. She looked as beautiful in real life as she did on TV. I noticed she had a very distinctive roller bag that she checked out, mostly red with a white diagonal stripe. When my sweet but bitchy wife returned from her escapade, all she had with her was a small bag with the name of the craft store on it. Didn't the store live up to your expectations? I asked because Daphne is not known for her frugal spending habits. Yes, it was so. Everything was as great as Carol promised. Most of my purchases are delivered directly to my home. There are too many things to take with you to the Cayman Islands, she chuckled. Well, at least the shopping trip put her in a good mood. After her answer, she looked at me with confusion and asked, "Why are you wearing sunglasses?" Naturally, I wasn't going to answer, so that no one would notice that I was staring at Nora O'Donnell. So I took them off and replied, "For a while, the bright sun began to break through the windows, but it no longer bothers me." I got a good look at Nora's perfect figure before she disappeared into the SAW security line. My day improved markedly when we arrived at our gate and discovered that Nora and Jeff were on the same flight as us, also in first class. Since it would be illogical to put on my sunglasses again in the dim waiting room, I had to be very careful not to stare at Nora too clearly. I knew I wouldn't forgive myself if I didn't talk to her, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself. Then it hit me. I remembered one of my business partners talking about a great dinner he once had at Chef Jeff's in Washington, one of the restaurants owned by Jeff Tracy. Gathering all my courage, I headed towards him at the moment when he stood up to stretch his legs. "Hi, Jeff. You don't know me, but I'm Beryl Robbins," I smiled, looking only at him and avoiding Nora's gaze. "I'd like to tell you that your restaurant, Chef Jeff's, is getting great reviews in Chicago. 3 of my friends are simply delighted with the dishes they tried from you," I continued with a smile. Of course, he smiled in response to my words, and although in fact this was only a comment from one friend, I decided to embellish the truth a little so you can judge me for that. I added, "I'll definitely stop by your restaurant if I'm in Washington on business." We chatted a little more, and then he introduced me to Nora, who watched our conversation with interest. "Oh, I forgot that you're married to Jeff," I said to Nora with a smile and shook her hand, feeling an electric current run through my entire body. "My favorite news anchor is married to who might be my favorite restaurateur in Washington, if I ever get into Chef Jeff's," I continued, still smiling. A minute later, boarding began for first class, and they headed towards the exit. I walked back to Daphne to grab my carry-on while Nora and Jeff presented their tickets. "Was that Nora O'Donnell you were talking to?" Daphne asked. "Well, actually, I was talking to her husband, and then he introduced me," I replied as casually as possible. Daphne usually watches the ABC News with David Muir, while I prefer Nora, but Daphne has a good opinion of Nora. In addition, Nora and Jeff turned out to be our neighbors in the first-class cabin. I introduced them to Daphne before the economy class boarding began, and Daphne chatted casually with Nora for a few minutes without being intrusive. When we landed in Grand Cayman, Nora and Jeff got off the plane ahead of us and stopped at the airport store while Daphne and I headed straight to the baggage carousel. The airline we were on unloaded first-class luggage first, so we only waited a minute before our suitcases appeared on the belt. I took our luggage off the conveyor and we stepped aside, but Nora and Jeff had not yet appeared. But I did notice a suspicious-looking guy who looked around and then grabbed Nora's distinctive red and white bag from the carousel. As he moved towards the exit, I said to Daphne, Wait here, I think this guy is stealing luggage. I didn't see him on our flight. I didn't mention that it was Nora's bag. It took me about 50 meters to catch up with him. I grabbed the bag and said, "This is not your bag, buddy." "This is mine," he snapped, trying to snatch it from me, but my grip was stronger. "Then tell me what the name is on the tag," I suggested, knowing that he would not be able to do this, since the tag was closed with a flap. "Fuck off if you value your life," he muttered. "You're not leaving with that bag, you freak," I snapped back. Suddenly, he pulled out a knife, a small one, and before I knew it, he started waving it in front of me. He scratched my left forearm, but it was only a small wound. Suddenly, my old violent tendencies awoke in me, and before I had time to realize what had happened, this guy was already lying unconscious on the floor. I think I instinctively hit him between the legs with a round kick and then slammed his face into my knee, but I'm not exactly sure because everything in front of my eyes turned red. The woman screamed and two guards, a man and a woman, ran towards us. Seeing the cut on my forearm and the knife lying next to the criminal, they immediately realized that I was not the culprit. One of the guards turned the criminal's face over and recognized him, which finally confirmed my words. They did not suggest that I was the aggressor. I showed them the tag on the bag and explained the situation. I also showed my passport and said that I would be staying at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel and left my phone number. The female security guard seemed to want me to have a good impression of Grand Cayman and, smiling in a pleasant Caribbean accent, said, "We know this man. He is a bad person. Please enjoy your time in Grand Cayman, Mr. Robbins. We'll take him to the police. And if you meet Elena, a waitress at the St. June restaurant at the Ritz, say hi to her. This is my sister." "I'll definitely pass it on," I smiled in response. "And take care of your wound. We have a first aid station in the main terminal, not far from the United Airlines counter." "Thank you, Caroline," I replied, reading her name on the badge. "I'll definitely come by and thank you again for your help and prompt response." I grabbed Nora's bag and headed back to the baggage carousel, hoping Nora hadn't arrived yet so I could just leave her suitcase without further explanation. But I was unlucky. Daphne, Nora, and Jeff were already standing there, looking at me in surprise. "What happened?" Daphne asked. "I didn't see this guy on our flight," I replied, pointing to Nora's bag. So I asked him to say the name on the tag. Instead, he pulled out a knife and I went at him. It turned out to be Nora's bag. All three were shocked. "Your hand is bleeding," Nora said, looking at my left forearm. "Oh, it's just a scratch," I started, but was interrupted by Jeff and Daphne at the same time. Jeff's voice was the clearest. "You need to check this out." "Well, one of the guards told me to go to the infirmary next to the United office." I replied before Nora interrupted me again, taking my arm and saying, "Then let's go there." Nora, Jeff, and even Daphne made a huge deal out of it, to my embarrassment, but also to my delight, since Nora was holding my hand. We quickly got to the first aid station. The treatment took only 5 minutes, since the wound was really small. Soon all four were already sitting in a taxi, heading to the Ritz Hotel. Jeff insisted that he and Nora invite Daphne and me to dinner. I suggested the St. June restaurant in the hotel, since the security guard's sister worked there, and right in the taxi, Jeff made a reservation for 19 o'clock. When we got back to the room and the receptionist had left, Daphne was much kinder to me than usual. She didn't ask me a single question about my decision to intervene. Her main question was, who was that lying on the floor when the guards approached? "Criminal," I replied casually. "How did he get there?" "I'm not sure," I said with a smile. "After he cut me, I think I hit him between the legs and then slammed his face into my knee." "Is it true?" she asked, clearly delighted. I don't know why she was surprised. I'm 6'2", 215 pounds, and she knew I played football in college. When I saw the twinkle in her eyes, my hormones inspired by Nora took over. The thought, "So what if she's a cheater," immediately flashed through my head, followed by another. "She's hot, and if you do it to her from behind, you can imagine that it's Nora." Less than 2 minutes later, Daphne was lying naked on the bed of our hotel room, her legs spread wide and her fingers tangled in my hair as I furiously pleasured her. A couple of minutes later, she was already screaming with pleasure. A minute and a half later, we were already having sex. The next 5 minutes became the most passionate sex of my life, while I imagined myself having it with Nora. Daphne and I either passed out or fell asleep. When we woke up and looked at the clock, it was about 5:30. "You're an animal," she said with a smile, playful, not rude, for the first time in a long time. "You knocked me out with that sex." "I'm not sorry," I replied with a grin. "If my spine hasn't turned into a wet rag yet, I need to get up and straighten myself out. After what you did to me, I'll need at least an hour and a half to look presentable," she moaned. She didn't get her full 90 minutes to get ready, though, because, still inspired by Nora, I pinned her arms against the walls of the large, luxurious shower stall, stood behind her, grabbed her breasts like my life depended on it, and again made love to her. Daphne nearly collapsed on the shower floor, but I kept her on her feet and then washed her because she was too exhausted to do it herself. We were only 5 minutes late to the restaurant. Daphne could barely move her legs, and her mind had not yet recovered from our violent lovemaking. When we approached the pretty blonde hostess, I asked, "Can we be seated at the table that Elena is serving? I know her sister." "Of course," the hostess replied with a smile and led us to a table with a beautiful view of the ocean. We chatted, studied the menu, and soon a cute black girl approached our table, very similar to Caroline, only much smaller and younger. As she approached, I stood up and said with a big smile, "You must be Elena. I met your sister Caroline at the airport today." Elena immediately beamed and, in an even sweeter Caribbean accent than her sister, replied with a mischievous smile, "You're the guy she called me about. I've been told not to try to steal your luggage or otherwise anger you, or I'll end up in the hospital." Then she burst out laughing. Dinner was excellent. Delicious food, excellent service, pleasant atmosphere, and fun conversation. Elena went out of her way to make sure we were happy, and we chatted easily with her several times about Grand Cayman and local attractions. Surprisingly, Daphne only made 2 or 3 sarcastic comments about me to Nora during the entire dinner, which I tried to ignore, although it did raise Nora's eyebrows. Jeff paid, and knowing him to be a generous man, I'm sure he left Elena a big tip. She was definitely beaming when we left. After everyone else had passed by, I turned to Elena, placed a 50 Caymanian dollar bill in her hand, and said, "Thank you for the excellent service. And since I couldn't thank Caroline enough for her kindness at the airport, you now get it instead. I think I've found a friend for life." At least her tight hug and tears in her eyes confirmed it. Although all 4 of us were tired from the long trip, both Daphne and I, especially after 2 intense lovemaking sessions, we decided to stop by a nightclub and dance. Neither of us were big drinkers, but we left good tips, so we got a great table. We spent about 45 minutes there, but managed to dance to several songs. I even slowly danced with Nora while Jeff danced with Daphne. I was a real gentleman. Although it was quite difficult, I wanted so badly to pick Nora up and carry her to my room to do whatever I wanted with her. When we got back to the room, if Daphne didn't want to be touched again, she shouldn't have gone to bed. I was still under the influence of the all-too-polite slow dance with Nora, and although Daphne tried to push me away, complaining of pain from earlier sex, I talked her into having sex. The next few days were pleasant. We talked a few more times with Elena and the hostess at the St. June restaurant, where breakfast was served. We only saw Jeff and Nora in passing a few times, but they were always happy to see us, and we had light and pleasant, albeit short, conversations. I was surprisingly successful in switching off thoughts of Daphne's infidelity during this vacation, helped greatly by my imagination, which replaced the image of Daphne with the image of Nora. But around the 4th night, Daphne talked me into going to a seafood restaurant she'd heard about on the opposite side of Georgetown from the Ritz. I didn't like the look of the place, but Daphne liked the menu, and we stayed. I ordered the only non-seafood dish that was on the menu. Daphne ordered some kind of seafood stew. There were no problems at the restaurant, but in the middle of the night Daphne began vomiting and shaking with chills. One of the benefits of living in an expensive place like the Ritz is access to a concierge doctor. It only took 35 minutes from the time I called the front desk, and the doctor knocked on the door. He interviewed me and Daphne as best he could, since she looked terribly ill and, speaking in a pleasant Caribbean accent, diagnosed it as ciguatixin poisoning. "Sorry, I'm not familiar with this," I replied, as Daphne was too sick to say anything. "It's most likely because of the seafood stew. It apparently contained fish caught in warm reef waters. This is rare for this time of year, but not impossible," he explained. Then the doctor gave me a whole biology lecture about how fish eat algae containing this toxin, but at 3:30 in the morning, all the information flew past me. "What treatment?" I asked. "I can only relieve the symptoms. There is no treatment for the toxin itself. We can only wait until it leaves the body." I gave her an antiemetic and an antidiarrheal. They should help. "Around 8 a.m., give her this sedative," he continued, handing me 2 tablets in a plastic bag. "And make sure she drinks a whole bottle of water to stay hydrated. After that, she would just need to sleep. Sleep is the only thing that will help her." "How long will she sleep?" "After taking the sedative, hopefully about 10 to 12 hours. "Do I need to be there?" "No, just close the curtains, put a Do Not Disturb sign on the door, and check it a couple of times for 10 hours. She'll be fine." I thanked the doctor and gave him a $50 tip. After I gave Daphne the sedative at 8 a.m., she was no longer vomiting and her stomach had calmed down. I told her I would check on her occasionally, but otherwise leave her alone until 6 p.m. Since she only wanted to sleep, this suited her quite well. However, this created a problem for me, since we had a lot of activities planned for that day, for which I had already paid a considerable amount in advance. When I came down for breakfast, Jeff and Nora arrived at the same time as hostess Sybil. "Where is Daphne?" asked Nora. I briefly outlined the situation. "Why don't you have breakfast with us?" Jeff suggested. "Thank you, it would be my pleasure," I replied, although I didn't have my sunglasses on and had to be careful that Nora wouldn't notice me looking at her. "Can we have a table for 3, Sybil?" Jeff asked. Sybil was a hostess I had interacted with a few times before. I didn't know her name, but it was written on her badge. "Of course, Mr. Robbins," she smiled. As Nora and Jeff sat down, I quietly asked Sybil, "How do you know my name?" "Yes, Elena told everyone about you," she grinned. "Besides, you are quite pleasant to look at." Then she turned and walked away with a sway of her hips. It just amazed me. I don't think anyone has said that to me since I married Daphne. After we ordered, Jeff asked what my plans were for the day. Well, Daphne's poisoning really ruined all my plans. I had already paid in advance to rent a cabana at Ritz Beach, paddleboards for 45 minutes, kayaks for the next 45 minutes, and a jet ski for 90 minutes. Then we had a table booked at one of the restaurants on West Bay, and then tickets to the Turtle Center. "That's bad luck," Jeff said, and Nora nodded sympathetically. Jeff then turned to Nora and asked, "Since you wanted to combine physical activity with sightseeing, would you rather spend the day with Beryl instead of accompanying me?" "I'd love to, if Beryl doesn't mind," Nora replied with a grin. I looked at them in complete confusion, and Jeff explained, "Today I'm going to be visiting a dozen restaurants around the island, mostly in Georgetown, to talk to their owners about some of their signature dishes, and perhaps arrange cross-marketing with my restaurants in Washington. Nora was going to come with me, but knowing her, I'm sure she'll like what you have planned better." "You made my day. No week. No year," I laughed, to which they laughed too. Nora and I arrived at my cabana rental around 9:15, dressed in swimsuits, cover-ups, and sunblock. We also had a bag with us for our shift. Since I was wearing dark sunglasses and loose swim shorts, it was unlikely that I would be caught eyeing Nora. However, when I applied suntan lotion to her back, I had to talk non-stop to distract myself from wanting to do something that I would later regret. We had a great time paddleboarding and kayaking. She was better at paddleboarding, she had a lower center of gravity and a better sense of balance, and I was better at handling the kayak. I had more power per unit of weight. Although we didn't have a competition, I was worried that the jet ski might be a problem because I only rented one, and I didn't know how she would feel about sitting behind me and holding on to me. Luckily, she didn't want to drive the jet ski herself and was comfortable sitting behind me with her arms wrapped around me. I tried my best to look cool, doing sharp turns and circles to get her to hold on to me tighter, and judging by her laughter and witty comments, she liked it. When we got back to the cabana after jet skiing, I told her I was going to check on Daphne and get us some non-alcoholic pina coladas, so I'd be back in 20 minutes. She replied that this would just give her time to rest and change clothes. About 30 meters from the cabana, I realized that I had not taken the room key, which was in the pocket of my swimming trunks. That's why I came back. When I opened the side panel of the cabana, a picture appeared before me that I will remember for the rest of my life. Nora was lying naked on a chaise longue, arms and legs spread out, with her eyes closed and a contented expression on her face. Damn, I thought, her body was flawless. If there were any shortcomings in it, I certainly didn't see them. I got horny instantly. I quickly closed the panel and began to think of ways not to embarrass her if she found out that I had seen her. However, while I was still standing in place, my pockets seemed to change their position, and I found the room key that had been with me all this time. Feeling enormously awkward and no doubt blushing, I moved on. When I entered the room, Daphne was still sleeping like the dead and snoring loudly. I didn't bother her. I grabbed drinks from the beach bar and returned to the cabana exactly 20 minutes later, as promised. To avoid a possible awkward situation, I shouted towards the cabana, "Are you dressed, Nora? I have pina coladas." "Yes, you can come in," she replied, although it was clear that she had just put on her swimsuit top. We talked while we drank our drinks. I changed my clothes, as she promised, without looking, and then we moved on. Lunch was wonderful, the food was great, and the view was spectacular. After that, we enjoyed spending 2 hours at the Turtle Center, and then made a quick stop at Hell to take some photos and buy postcards to send to friends and family saying, "Greetings from Hell." When we were almost back at the Ritz around 5:40, Nora turned to me and said, "I came on this vacation to take my mind off work, which has been a nightmare for the last 3 months. And I just realized that from the moment we sat down for breakfast until now, I never thought about work. Thank you so much for this wonderful day, Beryl." After these words, she kissed me on the cheek. I don't know how I managed not to crash into the nearest palm tree and keep my arousal level below the acceptable limit. It was one of the 10 best days of my life, but I didn't tell Nora that. I simply smiled and replied, "It was a fantastic day. You turned disaster into pleasure, for which I will be forever grateful." I bit my tongue to keep from saying too much and making myself look like an idiot by admitting that she was the perfect woman, smart, sweet, beautiful, and incredibly sexy, which would ruin the day. By 7 p.m. Daphne was almost human. We went to the casual restaurant at the Ritz for something light to eat. She only ate half her portion, but she drank almost a gallon of juice and water, which helped her regain her strength. Of course, I had to tell her about my day, but I greatly downplayed how fun it was and emphasized several times that it was Jeff's idea. Unfortunately, the next day Daphne turned back into the bitch she was before the trip. But now, unlike before, I was no longer going to tolerate her antics. I answered her almost equally to every attack. True, she had more experience in such a struggle, so I still felt unhappy when, in the end, unable to bear it, I went to the gym and she headed to the pool. I trained intensely for 90 minutes in the Ritz fitness room, alternating between weights and cardio on the elliptical. After practice, as I walked past the pool, I saw Daphne sitting next to Nora and pouring her heart out to her. Judging by the expression on Nora's face, she did not like this conversation at all, but out of politeness, she could not interrupt it. I decided to save her. Putting on sunglasses to hide any possible glances at Nora's figure, I walked up to them and, ignoring Daphne, said, "Hi, Nora. I saw Jeff in the lobby, and he said he needed to talk to you as soon as possible, so I told him that if I see you, I'll tell him to come to his room. Nora instantly grabbed this opportunity and, quickly gathering her things, said goodbye to Daphne and headed out. Daphne said something to me, but I ignored her and simply followed Nora into the main hotel building. On the way, Nora said, "I know your story about Jeff is complete nonsense, but thanks anyway for saving me." The conversation with Daphne was not at all pleasant. She humiliated you all the time. "I noticed, that's why I came over," I replied. "Let's find a quiet place in the hotel lobby. I want something to discuss with you," Nora continued. We barely spoke until we found a secluded corner between the main lobby and one of the hotel's banquet rooms, where Nora gently pushed me into an alcove. "Why are you still married to her?" Nora asked sharply, looking at me with a serious expression on her face. While I was gathering my thoughts to answer, she continued, "You are too good for her, and she does not appreciate you at all. So why are you still with her?" I sighed heavily. "If I tell you, will you promise not to judge?" "I promise. I'm just not sure I can find another woman who would interest me. Someone may want to be with me for the money, but not for my own sake," I muttered rather than say it out loud, and looked down, avoiding Nora's gaze. She laughed. Polite and always reserved, Nora O'Donnell laughed. But seeing my embarrassment, she quickly made a serious face and continued in a more serious tone. "Are you kidding me? Helena and Sybil would both run into your arms if you only winked at them. And that day when we were at the Turtle Center, at least a third of the women there looked at you with long and apprising glances. Maybe a couple of 65-year-old women with warts on their noses and excess weight could." I began, but Nora interrupted me again with laughter. "Are you really that blind?" One of the women, who looked like a model, almost glared at you. "If her eyes were lasers, you wouldn't be alive." Apparently my eyes brightened a little because Nora added, "Honestly, if you and I had met when we were both single, we might have worked out something." My eyes seemed to be bulging and my mouth was slightly open because Nora suddenly smiled, pulled me closer by my shirt, and kissed me on the cheek. Then she whispered, "You have to move on. Find a woman who deserves you. Believe me, there are many of them warm and accessible who would be happy to be with you." After these words, Nora turned around and headed towards the lobby. I was so stunned that I didn't even look at her when she left. I stood in a stupor. It seemed to me that it lasted several minutes, and chaos still reigned in my head. Finally, I pulled myself together and headed towards the elevators. On the way, I passed a pretty woman in her 30s who smiled at me. And when I walked past the St. June restaurant, Sybil specially waved at me and smiled too. I smiled back. When I returned to the room, I immediately went to the shower. Under the warm streams of water, a clear understanding of the situation gradually returned to me. I wasn't entirely sure that Nora was telling me the complete truth, but if a woman as smart, sweet, and attractive as Nora could take a liking to me, then there was no reason to put up with Daphne's antics any longer. Once I was dried off and dressed, I spent a significant amount of money calling the States to contact my private investigator. "Jack, I need you to do something for me. Email me the report you gave me 2 weeks ago, but with today's date and a note that this is the first time you've sent it." "I can do it, Beryl," replied Jack, "but you understand that I cannot swear under oath that this was the first time if I am subpoenaed." "I understand that, but it won't come to that," I replied. "Okay, you'll have a report in 15 minutes, he replied. 21 minutes later, even though I was checking my phone, every 30 seconds I received a report with the required postscript. While I was waiting, I managed to pack my suitcase. As soon as I received the report, I emailed a copy to Daphne and immediately left. The concierge booked me a flight directly to O'Hare Airport in Chicago in economy class, since there were no more seats in the first class, but I didn't care. I just wanted to go home. 2 hours later, I was in a taxi heading to the airport. On the way, I texted Nora, whose number she gave me. "Thank you for everything. You are the perfect woman. I just left Daphne, and I'm going to file for divorce as soon as I get back. You gave me the confidence I was missing. Right before boarding, I checked my phone for the first time since I texted Nora. There were two messages that interested me. The first is from Nora, a simple smiley face. The second is from Daphne. Where are you, Beryl? We need to talk. Please come to the room as soon as possible. I smiled and deleted the message from Daphne, but left the message from Nora. From the moment I returned to Chicago, I started acting tough. I knew it wouldn't last long, but I still took all the money out of our joint bank and brokerage accounts and put it into new accounts in my name only. I canceled all of our joint credit cards, removed Daphne from our cell phone plan, took her most valuable jewelry from our safe, and placed it in another safe at another bank registered to an LLC that Daphne knew nothing about. I also changed the locks on our house and changed the garage door code. I hired a family law attorney from the big law firm that handled my business, and the very next day I filed for divorce, citing adultery and naming her lover, even though in Illinois adultery has no legal significance except as one of the factors in determining irreconcilable differences. I also made sure that a copy of the divorce petition was sent to Ronald's wife. When Daphne returned to Chicago on her scheduled flight 3 days after me, I continued to stand firm. She had to get a court order to get into the house, and I refused to give her any information about the money in our joint accounts or after she found out about her jewelry. Later, Julia Dotson, Ronald's wife, called me. At first, she attacked me with reproaches for not warning her in advance, but I calmed her down by sending her a copy of the private investigator's report. In her second call, she promised to figuratively take his place as a man. I knew that eventually I would have to give Daphne half of our joint assets, with the exception of everything related to my business, since this was protected by the prenuptial agreement. However, I wanted to cause Daphne as much discomfort as possible. Surprisingly, Daphne seemed interested in reconciliation, I think mainly because she did not want to lose her usual standard of living. However, what is even more surprising is that she began to express some feelings towards me. When Daphne returned to Chicago, she had to get a court order to get back into the house. I moved her into the guest room and completely ignored her, didn't even talk to her. Some time later, our lawyers agreed to meet to discuss the terms of the divorce. This meeting took place in my lawyer's office. As soon as we sat down at the table, Daphne began to complain about the situation, but I immediately interrupted her. Shut up. I'm not going to listen to your whining or humiliation. This won't work anymore. If you want to discuss the terms of the agreement, I'm ready for a rational conversation. Otherwise, you can throw it all away. Her lawyer intervened. Swearing is not conducive to productive dialogue. But I interrupted him. I don't care what you think is productive or not. You yourself called this meeting. Either we discuss the matter calmly, or I leave, and then I will make her life as difficult as possible until the divorce is formalized, and this will happen no matter how much you resist. After that, we discussed the terms of the divorce quite calmly for about 10 minutes, until I decided to suggest something that I did not want to talk about in the presence of lawyers. I said, Daphne, I would like to discuss something with you in private. It might speed up the process. Do you agree? Both lawyers advised against it, but Daphne looked me in the eye and agreed despite their objections. As soon as the door closed behind the lawyers, I began. Let's talk frankly. Before I got the private investigator's report, you and I had great sex in the Caymans, and I'm not sure I can manage without him while the divorce is going on. I suggest we make this agreement. We can continue to have sex, but it will not be considered a legal reconciliation or as if I have forgiven you for cheating. This way, we will be more comfortable until we get divorced. Unless, of course, you decide to move in with Ronald. By the way, I know that Julia kicked him out. Daphne looked at me with the strangest look I've ever seen on her. She took a break and after a couple of minutes said, I've always loved having sex with you. She began, but I interrupted her. Daphne, I don't need your empty talk. Do you agree to this proposal? In return, you receive 50% of our joint assets and alimony for only 1 year. I suggest this. I knew she had already broken up with Ronald because when I added her back to our family cell phone plan, I bugged her phone. Besides, I knew that Daphne loved our way of life too much to lose it. She was sure that if we continued to sleep together, I would call off the divorce. Therefore, I was confident in her answer. She let me wait a couple of minutes before finally saying, "Yes, I agree. Another condition is that neither of us should have sex with anyone else during this period. Anyone who violates this rule receives only 20% of our assets instead of 50%. She shrugged, "Okay." We called the lawyers back and instructed them to draw up an agreement, including the division of assets. We agreed to wait in the conference room while the document was drawn up, which took about an hour. I tried not to be harsh with Daphne, and to my surprise, she also behaved submissively. We signed the document in the presence of a notary, discussing only minor details regarding the division of household property. We both received copies of the agreement and went our separate ways. As we went down the elevator, I said to Daphne, "I'll be back home at 7 in the evening. I'll bring you Chinese food if that suits you." "Okay," she smiled. That evening began the most amazing period in my sexual relationship with Daphne. Although I used to think our sex was very good when she agreed to it, now I had a different attitude. Although I still wanted to please her, it was not to make her happy, but to make her feel even more sorry for cheating on me. I knew that now she would try her best to please me because she thought that she could get me back if she tried. This was a rare case when my plan worked exactly as I intended. I now saw Daphne as a high-class, easy-to-get girl who didn't require condoms. I tried to please her as much as possible, and she really tried to please me much more than in the entire time of our marriage. I think for the next 8 months while the divorce was going on, there wasn't a single day when we didn't have sex at least once even during her period. Previously, during her period, sex was strictly prohibited. Now we just did it in the shower or on a special mat. I did things to Daphne that she would never have agreed to before, including a lot of things that she used to find humiliating. I think that although Daphne enjoyed our new sexual experiments, she only agreed to them because I constantly deceived her. I pretended that I was thinking about canceling the divorce, and at some stage even drew up a marriage contract with clauses on penalties for infidelity, which provided for the cancellation of the divorce. Since I had never lied to her before, and she wanted to believe in a possible reconciliation, she completely bought it. Everything was going exactly as I planned until 4 days before the divorce was to be finalized. I decided to do all the I's. 4 days before our divorce was to become final, Daphne apparently thought I would change my mind. On Monday evening, feeling that this would be our last act, I decided to step up my game. Inspired and energized, I gave her a night she was unlikely to ever forget. We were both almost in a state of pleasure when Daphne finally pressed herself against me and whispered, "Honey, you need to cancel the divorce by Thursday, but I would really like you to do it tomorrow." I smiled at her, squeezed her breasts, and kissed her lips. "Yes, I promised to file for annulment of the divorce, didn't I? But remember that you promised not to cheat on me when we got married. But instead you cheated, and at the same time humiliated me. So I lied to you. I'm not going to cancel anything." Daphne's face changed, and she shouted in rage, "Don't joke like that. It's not funny. We've been making love so wonderfully these past months." "No, we're not making love," I replied with a grin. "We just had sex, and it really was the best sex of our lives. But there was no love here. You are an amazing lover, Daphne, but I don't love you anymore, and I want to separate." As I expected, Daphne freaked out. She started screaming and even tried to hit and bite me. I was prepared for this and quickly restrained her as if using a straitjacket-like grip. She continued to scream and swear, but I just left the room, changed my clothes, collected my things, which were already packed, and loaded them into the car. The day before, I had removed all of our valuables and personal items, including artwork and technology, replacing them with counterfeit copies so she wouldn't notice. When I returned to the bedroom, I saw that Daphne was already crying, but I didn't feel anything. I untied her without saying another word and left the house. During the divorce process, I began to think about what Nora told me. Did I really have a chance of finding someone attractive and worthy? I was surprised how open the women were to me. Most of them expressed interest indirectly, but two cases were very overt. The first situation happened with one of my business partners, a woman who was a senior manager in one of the companies with which we collaborated. At one of the dinners after a business meeting, when everyone else had already left, she directly stated that I could call her at any time if I wanted sex, without any obligations. She was about a 9.5 out of 10 on the look scale. The second incident happened at a charity event I went to with Daphne. There I met a woman named Alicia. She was 32 years old and was definitely at least a 9.8 out of 10. We had a nice chat in the company of other people and then one-on-one. She was easy to talk to and seemed to really like me. We even did a few slow dances, which annoyed Daphne. At one point, Alicia whispered to me, "Your wife looks at me like she wants to kill me." "Don't pay any attention to her," I replied. "We are in the process of divorce. The only reason we're still together is sex. She thinks I can call off the divorce, but I'm not going back to her after what she did." Alicia laughed. "Wow, just like the spirit." "Your husband doesn't seem to mind us dancing," I joked, pushing the conversation in a different direction. She laughed again. "This is not my husband. In fact, he's not even my real beau. This is my friend from college who hasn't come out of the closet yet. I came with him so that his work colleagues would think he had a girlfriend." "Are you married?" I asked, although there was no ring on her finger. "No, but after your divorce, maybe you should try dating me. I'm sure I'm better than your wife in bed," she said and gently bit my earlobe. I blushed and didn't know what to answer. She, seeing my awkwardness, simply smiled and added, "Just no." We exchanged phone numbers, but I didn't make any promises to her. When the divorce was finally finalized, I was surprised that I had mixed feelings that day. Although Daphne left me a goodbye message filled with tears and reconciliation, I didn't want to start dating someone new right away. I wanted to proceed with caution. I decided that returning to Grand Cayman would be a great way to start a new life. Exactly a year after I first visited there, I flew to the island again, this time alone. In Chicago at this time, it was 19° F and cloudy, and in Cayman, it was 82° F and sunny. As I approached baggage claim, I saw a familiar face. It was Caroline, the airport security guard, who was so kind to me when I stopped the thief that time. I approached her and said, "Hi, Caroline, do you remember me?" Her face looked puzzled for a moment, but then she recognized me. Her eyes lit up with joy. "Mr. Robbins," she smiled and opened her arms for a hug. We had a nice chat while I waited for my luggage. Unfortunately, she informed me that her sister Elena now works at another restaurant, so I will not see her at the Ritz. The first 2 days in Cayman were pretty relaxing. I did paddle boarding, kayaking, swimming, and worked out at the gym. On the third morning, while I was chatting with one of the hotel concierges, I noticed an attractive woman nearby talking to another concierge. According to the conversation, her wallet was stolen, and she was discussing the best way to get money and credit cards from the States. When I finished my business, I waited for the woman to finish talking and then approached her. "I'm embarrassed, but I overheard your conversation with the concierge," I began apologetically. "It's a shame that your wallet was stolen. If you want, I can help." She looked at me suspiciously, but did not immediately refuse. Inspired by this, I continued, "I understand that as a beautiful woman you must be careful, so here is my passport," I said, taking it out of my pocket. "Take a photo with me and my passport and send it to someone so that if I turn out to be a maniac, they can find you." She still looked at me doubtfully. "You still have your phone, don't you?" I asked. "Yes, I stayed. But how exactly are you going to help?" "You see, you can continue to pay for services at the hotel without cash or credit cards, but you won't be able to do anything outside the hotel. I will give you $500 in Caymanian money, and you will give it back to me when you receive the money from the States." "And that's it? Is that all you have to offer?" she asked in surprise. Yes, no conditions. Although I have a table booked at Pepper's for 7 p.m. in my opinion, this is the best restaurant in Grand Cayman. If you want, you can join me for dinner, I replied with a smile. Her expression changed again to one of confusion, but then she smiled, took a photo on her phone, and sent something, clearly writing a message to someone. Are you, by any chance, writing to your husband? I asked, although I didn't see the wedding ring on her hand. No, I'm here celebrating my divorce while my ex-husband looks after our son. I just needed a break, she replied without looking up. When she finished texting, I counted 10 $50 bills and handed them to her. Now I need to know your name so I know who to contact for a refund, I said with a smile. Catherine McPhee, she replied, holding out her hand for me to shake. You can call me on the hotel extension, and they will connect you to my number if necessary. I squeezed her hand like a machine gun and stared at her with my mouth open. I was shocked that I didn't recognize her right away. But to be honest, who wouldn't be amazed to meet both of their famous crushes at once in the Caymans with a difference of only a year? You really are her, right? I muttered, still holding her hand and unable to let go. You and Nora O'Donnell are my famous crushes, I blurted out before I could stop myself, and realizing what I had said, I quickly let go of her hand, blushed, and felt the heat rise to my face. Catherine burst out laughing. That's the funniest thing I've ever heard. You look like you're about to faint. Are you okay? I tried to pull myself together. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that. It just came out without a filter. I started apologizing. Please accept my apologies. Are you apologizing for having another crush besides me? She laughed even more. I muttered a few more awkward phrases, and she continued to laugh, clearly amused by my embarrassment. Finally, I realized that she was just making fun of me, and when it dawned on me, I squeezed out. Well, since you are making fun of me like that, then now you are no longer my crush. I despise you. Regardless, I'm going on a cruise around the island in half an hour, so if you want to know how much I hate you now, come join me. Her laughter continued. I think I made her laugh more than she laughed all year while her divorce was dragging on. Wow, what would your wife say about this? I'm also here celebrating my divorce, which was finalized just a couple of weeks ago. And I'm here because it was in the Caymans that I gained the confidence to finally get rid of my cheating wife, I said, feeling more confident. Catherine replied, sounding lost in thought. This is the story I would like to hear. So even though you despise me and I find you disgusting, I think I'll join your cruise. But only if you pay. I'm not going to waste any of the $500 this gentleman gave me. After this embarrassing encounter, Catherine was so intrigued by my story that I wasn't sure if she believed me until I insisted that we call Nora. We were able to get through to Nora, and she, laughing, confirmed the whole story and even congratulated me on the divorce. The next 4 days, especially those nights that Catherine and I spent in my or her room, were the best of my life. But that's a completely different story. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.